Iran just told Israel, and by extension the United States, that the rules of engagement no longer apply Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. Thrawn didn't issue a warning through back channels. It didn't hide behind proxies. It launched what officials are now calling one of the most direct and coordinated military assaults in modern Middle Eastern history. We're talking about over 200 projectiles reportedly launched within hours. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones targeting key Israeli military infrastructure from multiple vectors. According to early reports coming out of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, air defense systems were pushed to their absolute limits. And here's the part that changes everything. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't calibrated. This was force, full force. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already convened an emergency war cabinet. U.S. President Joe Biden is reportedly in direct contact with Pentagon leadership, and sources are now confirming that American naval assets in the eastern Mediterranean have shifted into active defensive posture. For decades, the assumption was simple. Iran fights through proxies. Israel responds with precision and escalation stays contained. That assumption, it may be dead because what just happened suggests something far more dangerous. An open state confrontation between two of the most heavily armed powers in the region with nuclear implications hanging just beneath the surface. And what you're about to hear changes everything about how this conflict could unfold, not in months, but in days. Before we dive deeper, make sure you've hit the notification bell so you don't miss updates on how this story develops. This situation is evolving fast. Let me take you back to Tuesday, March 17th, 2026, just hours before the world realized something had fundamentally changed. At approximately 02:40 a.m. local time in Thrawn, multiple intelligence channels began picking up unusual activity across several Iranian military installations. By 03:15 a.m., reports are now confirming coordinated missile launches from at least 4 Alagalag Moyer, including bases near Isfahan and Kermanshah. Here's what happened. According to officials, Hussein Salami appeared on Iranian state television shortly after the first wave was detected. He delivered a statement, just 27 words, that sent shockwaves through the region. The Zionist regime has crossed every red line. Tonight we respond not with warnings, but with decisive force. Within minutes of that statement, sirens began blaring across central and northern Israel. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed what many feared. This was not a limited strike. This was a coordinated multi-phase assault involving drones designed to overwhelm radar, followed by precision-guided ballistic missiles targeting strategic locations. Reports are coming in that at least 9 major sites were targeted in the first wave alone, including air bases and missile defense batteries. Civilian areas were also affected, though officials are still assessing damage. The immediate impact: regional airspace shut down. Emergency protocols activated across Jordan, Lebanon, and parts of Saudi Arabia. And within 45 minutes, the United States had deployed additional surveillance assets into the region. But here's what this actually signals. This wasn't retaliation in the traditional sense. This was a message, one that suggests Iran is no longer interested in shadow warfare. They're stepping into the open. If you're finding this as significant as I am, hit the like button. It helps this critical analysis reach more people who need to understand what's really happening. Now, what I'm about to show you changes everything you thought you knew about the Iran-Israel conflict. Because for over 40 years, the formula was simple, predictable, contained. For decades, the shadow war defined everything. Iran funds and arms proxy groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, networks in Iraq. Israel responds with precision airstrikes, targeted, deniable, often unacknowledged. The United States backs Israel diplomatically and militarily, but avoids direct confrontation with Thrawn. That's how the system worked. For 40 years, the formula was simple. Iran operates in the shadows, Israel strikes in the dark, and escalation is carefully managed to avoid full-scale war. Everyone assumed that both sides understood the risks, especially the nuclear threshold, and would stop short of crossing it. Even during flashpoints, the 2020 killing of Qasem Soleimani, repeated strikes inside Syria, cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, there was always a ceiling, a limit, a quiet understanding that direct state-on-state war would be catastrophic for everyone involved. But here's what nobody's talking about. That formula just broke. What happened on March 17th wasn't a proxy escalation. It wasn't plausible deniability. Iran directly launched a large-scale attack on Israel openly, publicly, and with full attribution. That shatters the old assumption that both sides would avoid direct confrontation at all costs. And what's different now is this. Once you move from shadow war to open war, the playbook disappears, the guardrails gone, the escalation ladder unpredictable. We are now in completely uncharted territory. Here's what I want to know from you in the comments. Do you think this changes the power dynamic permanently, or is this just a temporary shift? Let me know your thoughts below. Here's where it gets complicated. On the surface, this looks like a massive retaliation. Most people watching this unfold are thinking the same thing. Israel struck first, maybe in Syria, maybe targeting Iranian assets, and this is Iran responding with overwhelming force. A classic escalation cycle: action, reaction, containment. But here's the thing nobody's talking about. Sources are now confirming this attack may have been in preparation for weeks, possibly longer. Reports are coming in that Iranian military units began repositioning missile batteries as early as March 3rd, nearly 2 weeks before the strikes. Satellite imagery, according to defense analysts, shows unusual logistical movements near hardened launch facilities deep inside Iranian territory. And it doesn't stop there. Documents reveal that cyber units linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had already escalated digital probing operations against Israeli infrastructure days before the physical attack began. Officials are now saying this wasn't just a military strike. It was a synchronized multi-domain operation combining cyber warfare, drone swarms, and ballistic missile strikes. Why does that matter? Because that's not retaliation. That's planning. That's doctrine. In plain terms, this suggests Iran wasn't just responding emotionally to a trigger event. They were executing a premeditated strategy designed to test and possibly overwhelm Israel's layered defense systems like Iron Dome and Arrow. And if that's true, then what we're witnessing isn't just escalation. It's a shift toward a new kind of warfare in the region, faster, more coordinated, and far more dangerous than anything we've seen before. If you want to stay ahead of these developments that mainstream media isn't covering, subscribe to the channel. We break down these complex stories every week. But that's not even the real story. What's actually happening behind the scenes goes deeper, and it's far more strategic than a single night of missile strikes. The latest information shows this operation may be tied to a broader regional realignment that's been quietly unfolding for months. Let me explain. On March 10, 2026, just 7 days before the attack, Ibrahim Ray held a closed door meeting with senior military leadership and intelligence officials in Tehran. According to sources familiar with the briefing, the discussion wasn't just about Israel. It focused on deterrence, recalibration, and what one official described as breaking the pattern of asymmetry. Now connect that to March 14th. Reports are coming in that Hezbollah significantly increased its alert level along the southern Lebanese border. Not a full mobilization, but enough to stretch Israeli defense planning. At the same time, U.S. Central Command recorded unusual drone activity over parts of eastern Syria, near areas where Iranian-backed militias operate. That's coordination. And here's where it gets even more precise. At exactly 03:12 a.m., on March 17th, multiple radar systems detected the first wave of drones entering Israeli airspace, followed just minutes later by ballistic missiles. That timing matters. Drones are slower. They arrive first to saturate defenses. Missiles come next to strike targets once systems are overwhelmed. This wasn't random. This was engineered. And what it enables is something far more concerning. Iran demonstrating it can orchestrate simultaneous pressure across multiple fronts, Lebanon, Syria, and directly from its own territory, forcing Israel to divide its response capacity in real time. That's not just escalation. That's a strategic message to the entire region. If you think more people need to understand this, hit the like button and share this video. This kind of analysis doesn't get covered anywhere else. Now, let's break down what actually happened from a technical and military standpoint, because the language officials are using matters. This was described as a layered multi-vector saturation strike designed to degrade integrated air and missile defense systems. The attack utilized coordinated UAV swarms followed by precision-guided ballistic systems intended to exploit radar prioritization thresholds and interceptor depletion rates. Let me translate that in plain English. Iran essentially tried to overload Israel's defense systems by flooding them with too many incoming threats at once. Think of it like this. Systems like Iron Dome can intercept rockets, but they have limits. They track, prioritize, and fire interceptors based on incoming threats. If you send 20 targets, they can handle it. If you send 200 at once, now you're forcing the system to make choices. That's industry speak for saturation warfare. And here's why that matters. Israel's defense network isn't just one system, it's layers: short-range interception, mid-range, long-range. But each layer has finite interceptors. Reports are coming in that in the first 90 minutes alone, dozens of interceptors were fired in rapid succession. That's not sustainable in a prolonged engagement. Think about what that means in practice. If Iran or any actor can consistently overwhelm those systems, even briefly, they create windows, small gaps, seconds, maybe minutes. But that's all it takes for high V-value targets, air bases, command centers, radar installations to be hit. And once those are degraded, the entire defensive posture weakens. That's not just a military tactic. That's a strategic test of resilience. What's your take on this approach? Does it seem like smart strategy or overreach? Drop your opinion in the comments. I read them all. And then this happened. The response was immediate, and it wasn't just rhetoric. Within hours of the strikes, Anthony Blinken held an emergency press briefing in Washington, D.C., stating that the United States stands firmly with Israel's right to defend itself, while also confirming that American forces had already assisted in intercepting a number of incoming threats. Reports are now confirming U.S. naval destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean engaged defensive systems during the attack. But the United States wasn't alone. In United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer convened an emergency COBRA meeting, with officials are now saying British intelligence assets were redirected to monitor Iranian military movements in real time. Meanwhile, France issued a statement through President Emmanuel Macron calling the attack a dangerous escalation that risks regional war while quietly increasing its military readiness in the region. And then there's the regional response. According to officials, Saudi Arabia and Jordan both activated air defense systems and temporarily closed sections of their airspace. Reports are coming in that Jordanian forces intercepted at least a handful of drones that crossed into its territory, an extraordinary move that signals just how widespread this incident became. Think about the scale here: multiple countries, multiple militaries acting within minutes. That tells us something critical. This wasn't seen as an isolated Israel-Iran exchange. It was treated as a regional security event with global implications. And when that many actors respond that quickly, it signals one thing: the world is bracing for what comes next. The international response to this is still developing. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you get updates as more countries react. Now, here's where it gets complicated and honestly a little uncomfortable, because less than 2 weeks before this attack on March 5th, 2026, senior officials from Iran stood before international media and publicly stated they had no intention of escalating regional tensions. Iran seeks stability and mutual security in the Middle East. Think about that for a moment. Fast forward to March 17th, and we're looking at one of the largest direct assaults on Israel in decades. But it gets even sharper. Less than 72 hours earlier, diplomatic channels reportedly involving European intermediaries were still engaged in back-channel discussions aimed at de-escalation. Officials are now saying those talks were ongoing as late as March 14th. While diplomacy was happening, preparation was happening, and it doesn't stop there. Less than 24 hours before the strikes, regional airspace coordination meetings were still focused on commercial traffic safety, not active conflict zones. Airlines were operating under normal assumptions. Governments were signaling calm, then everything changed overnight. The irony was thick enough to cut. While public messaging emphasized restraint, military planning appears to have been moving in the opposite direction. That's not de-escalation, that's strategic misdirection. And to be fair, this isn't unique to one side. Governments often say one thing publicly while preparing for another privately, but the scale and timing here, that contrast is hard to ignore. While the world was hearing stability, the reality was escalation. If this contradiction concerns you as much as it concerns me, show your support by hitting the like button. Let's make sure this gets the attention it deserves. Let me explain exactly why this matters long term. Because this isn't just about missiles and military posture. This is about money, energy, and global power flows. Here's what this means practically. The moment this attack happened, energy markets reacted. Reports are coming in that crude oil prices spiked by nearly 8% within hours of the first confirmed strikes. Brent crude briefly crossed the $112 per barrel mark, while shipping insurers began reassessing risk premiums for vessels moving through the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point responsible for roughly 20% of global oil transit. That's not small. That's a direct hit to the global economy. Now follow the money. Higher oil prices mean increased revenue for producers like Russia and Iran itself, countries already under heavy sanctions. At the same time, major importers, think India and parts of the European Union, face rising energy costs, which could translate into inflation spikes within weeks. But here's where it gets strategic. The latest information shows defense spending is also shifting fast. According to preliminary estimates, Israel could burn through hundreds of millions of dollars in interceptor missiles if this pace continues. Some analysts are putting the cost at over $1 billion if sustained over multiple weeks. Meanwhile, the United States is now reportedly considering additional emergency military aid packages, potentially in the range of $3 to $5 billion. Think about what that means in practice. This conflict creates winners and losers. Defense contractors gain, energy exporters gain, but civilian economies, especially in developing regions, take the hit through higher fuel and food prices. And what this means strategically is simple. Prolonged instability benefits actors who thrive in disruption and pressures those dependent on stable global trade. That's a power shift, not immediate, but real. This kind of strategic analysis takes hours of research if you value this depth of coverage. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to understand how global power really works. So where does this actually go? Because here's the thing, strikes are fast, retaliation is immediate, but sustaining a conflict like this, state on state, high intensity, that's hard. Really hard. First challenge, escalation control. Israel now faces enormous pressure to respond decisively. Officials are now saying options on the table include direct strikes on Iranian territory, cyber retaliation, or targeting regional assets. But here's the risk. If Israel escalates too far, it could trigger a wider war involving Hezbollah, or even draw in U.S. forces more directly. Can they actually deliver a response that's strong enough to deter but controlled enough to avoid full-scale war? That's a narrow path. Second challenge, resource sustainability. Reports are coming in that missile defense systems, while highly effective, are expensive and finite. Interceptors cost tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars per launch. Now multiply that by dozens or hundreds in a single night. That's not just a military issue, that's an economic strain. And if this continues for weeks, not days, the cost curve becomes unsustainable. Third challenge, political pressure. In Washington, Joe Biden is navigating a delicate balance, supporting an ally while avoiding another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict, especially in an election-sensitive environment where critics, including allies and opponents, are already questioning U.S. strategy in the region. Sources are now confirming intense debates inside the administration about how far to go. So here's the question, will it be enough? Because de-escalation requires coordination, restraint, back-channel diplomacy, and right now none of those seem guaranteed. What do you predict? Will this succeed or is it doomed to spiral further? Give me your prediction in the comments and tell me why you think that. Here's where this goes from here. The next 72 hours will be critical. According to defense officials, Israel's response window typically falls within that time frame, fast enough to maintain deterrence, but calculated enough to avoid uncontrolled escalation. That puts us right up against March 20th, 2026 as a key marker. Now here's what I'm watching for. First, does Benjamin Netanyahu authorize direct strikes inside Iranian territory? Not proxy targets, not Syria, Iran itself. If that happens, we're in a completely different phase of conflict. Second, what does Joe Biden do publicly? Does he push for restraint or signal full backing for escalation? Officials are now saying internal discussions are ongoing, and the tone of that response will shape how far this goes. Third, do we see movement from Hezbollah? Even limited engagement from Lebanon opens a second front, and historically that's been one of Israel's biggest strategic concerns. If Netanyahu shows up with a limited symbolic response, this might stabilize, at least temporarily. If he shows up with large-scale strikes deep inside Iran, this accelerates fast. And the stakes here can't be overstated because once multiple fronts open, once multiple countries are actively involved, de-escalation becomes exponentially harder. What starts as retaliation becomes regional war. These next few months are critical. Hit the like button if you want to see follow-up coverage, and make sure notifications are on so you don't miss the analysis when these checkpoints arrive. That's the story. That's what happened on March 17th, 2026, when Iran launched a direct large-scale attack on Israel. Not just another shadow conflict, not another proxy escalation, but a moment that may signal a transformation from covert rivalry to open confrontation between two regional powers. And that shift matters because for decades, the Middle East operated under a fragile but understood system: deniability, restraint, controlled escalation. What we may be witnessing now is the breakdown of that system, a move from indirect pressure to direct force, from calculated ambiguity to visible conflict. Here's what kept me up last night. We might be watching the early stages of something historians will look back on and say that was the moment when the line between cold conflict and open war disappeared. Or we might be witnessing a high-stakes escalation that eventually pulls back from the edge, like we've seen before. I'll be honest, I don't think anyone knows yet. And that uncertainty at this scale, involving this many actors with this level of military capability, that's what makes this different. That's what makes this dangerous. So here's the question. Do you think this is the beginning of a full-scale regional war, or will global pressure force both sides back into containment? And how quickly do you think that decision gets made? I'm genuinely curious what you think about this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to hear your perspective on where this is headed.